This video contains spoilers on The Elephant Man and all things Twin Peaks. Viewers be warned, the spoilers are about to begin. During my childhood, I watched a lot of movies, many that still hold a special place in my heart. But there were two movies in particular that truly moved me in profound and unique ways, both of which I first experienced when I want to say I was 9 years old. One of them was Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, and the other was David Lynch's The Elephant Man. My 9-year-old self had a difficult time fully understanding either of these two movies, but even at a young age, I was able to recognize that there was something that was very special about them. What I found most striking about The Elephant Man was how terrified I was throughout the entire opening segments of the movie. I was no stranger to horror movies as a child. I was a huge fan of 80s horror and watching slasher films and ghost stories and the like. Visiting the local video store to rent horror films was a favorite childhood pastime. Sure, they'd frighten me a little sometimes. That was all part of the thrill. But the experience of seeing The Elephant Man produced a different type of fear. I was truly spooked by the opening segments, unlike I had been watching anything else. Then I remember being delighted when I later discovered I had it all wrong. I then recognized that John Merrick was no monster to be feared. He was just a man who was shunned because he was different and born into a terrible fate beyond his control. It was very easy to relate to the plight of this unfortunate soul who lived a frightened, miserable existence. It was also very easy to relate to someone being bullied for being different. John Merrick was a compelling and lovable character that made it very easy to become invested in the story, even if my younger self was unable to understand a lot of the greater nuance. It seemed implausible to me that Treves would ever second guess all of the things he did to improve the life of John Merrick.
Am I a good man? Or am I a bad man?
What year is this?
So many of you are probably wondering what the hell this has to do with Twin Peaks. And what does this have to do with our beloved FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper? When the first two parts of Twin Peaks Season 3 were first broadcast on Showtime, and parts 3 and 4 were released on Showtime On Demand that same night, what initially struck me most was how it felt like a culmination of all of Lynch's prior projects. I quickly learned on the Twin Peaks Between Two Worlds Facebook group that I wasn't alone. Tons of fans were making similar observations. This isn't all that surprising, as there has always been a sort of interconnectedness among Lynch films, something that makes them feel uniquely Lynch. And with each powerhouse new chapter in Twin Peaks Season 3, this idea became even more amplified. There were all types of comparisons constantly being made with Lynch's prior works, like Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway, and Eraserhead, among others. But the ones that weren't getting many comparisons were The Straight Story and The Elephant Man. And as I noted in one of my earliest episodes here, I thought there were some strong ties between Twin Peaks and The Elephant Man. There were tons of audio and visual cues in The Elephant Man that were uniquely Lynch, and this resulted in the types of moods and tones that exude a vintage Lynchian style. These vibes are omnipresent throughout The Elephant Man. It may have been a more straightforward story than Lynch usually tackles, but it was in no way, shape, or form lacking in unsettling Lynchian eeriness. But where I thought the similarity was greatest were in the strong ties between Cooper and Merrick that came out of the journey each character underwent.
Where have you been? What did you do?
Cooper and Merrick both begin in hellish nightmare situations. Cooper is stuck in the Black Lodge, and Merrick is at the mercy of that heartless bastard Bites. Both are effectively being held captive with no control over their respective situations. Cooper is ultimately allowed to leave the lodge in a roundabout way, and Merrick ultimately finds his way free under the care of Frederick Treves. Once freed from captivity, Cooper and Merrick again find themselves in similar predicaments, in the sense that they are both learning to try and fit in, and each starts finding his way, and both exhibit a great abundance of gratefulness. They both seem overjoyed to be freed from their respective horrific states of captivity, and they become mesmerized and consumed with many of the simpler conveniences life has to offer that we can often take for granted. But most importantly, they both went from a state of cruel captivity before ultimately winding up in a place where they were both loved. That was the apex for both Cooper and Merrick, finding a home where they were loved.
Dougie! Dad? Dad!
Welcome home, lad. Home.
My home?
Let's return to something that baffled me as a child that I now find equally perplexing in an entirely different type of way. Treves and his moment of inner conflict.
Well, I'm beginning to believe that Mr. Bites and I are very much alike.
But all you do is profit from another man's misery.
You think you're better than me?
No, I never.
I've made Mr. Merrick into a curiosity all over again, doesn't it? I mean, this time in a hospital rather than a carnival.
You wanted the freak to show to those doctor chums of yours to make a name for yourself.
My name is constantly in the papers. I'm always being praised to the skies. Patients are now expressly asking for my services.
The patient has been called the Elephant Man. Thank you.
John Merrick is happier and more fulfilled now than he's ever been in his entire life, and it's completely due to you.
If you ask my opinion, he's only being stared at all over again.
Am I a good man? Or am I a bad man?
I am happy every hour of the day. I could not say that were it not for you.
So Treves ultimately realizes that he did improve Merrick's quality of life, even if he was still exploiting him on some level. This brings me back to the final scene in Twin Peaks, and the fact that Cooper never seemed to have that moment of inner conflict with regards to his own exploitation of Laura Palmer. And that leads me back to something I've discussed several times regarding the fact I believe there is compelling evidence that suggests Mr. C was victorious in the end. Why didn't Cooper give Laura a choice? He persuaded her to go with him by her own will, but he never really made it clear why. Indeed, Cooper didn't even appear to necessarily know why himself. But whatever Cooper did or didn't know, he must have at least known that there were potential risks involved with what he was doing. He may not have known exactly what the risks were, but surely he must have known that there were risks. Cooper made it a point to inform Diane of the risks, or so it appeared. Why didn't he do the same for Laura? Was he incapacitated in some way from the crossover? He didn't remember names like Richard and Linda, but he certainly seemed to know how to find Laura. And even previously, when Cooper intervened in the past and guided her by the hand, he didn't warn her of any risks then either. Mr. C again was the one with the experience points, as he seemingly steered the ship in his union with Bob. And Cooper definitely seemed darker when the two Coops reunited. There is the clue of an inner struggle with the coffee, and the fact that Cooper seemed overly aggressive with the rowdy cowboys. The end game for Mr. C and Good Coop involved Judy. I suppose there is also the matter of what did Mr. C lose when he created Dougie, and what did Cooper lose when he created another Dougie. I was always inclined to believe that there was some price to pay here, in terms of loss of essence. If Mr. C built the original Dougie Tulpa from his brightest essence, ridding himself of any trace of good he had left on that side of him, And if Good Cooper built the new Dougie Tulpa from some of his brighter essence, would that not be something that would give Mr. C an additional edge? That might explain why Mr. C is less Leland-like under his Bob influence than he seemingly was at the conclusion of Season 2. And just a quick note on Mr. C burning in the lodge. As many have brought that up to me, I never really viewed that as an obstacle for the Mr. C victory theory, because I'd always believed that by defeating his doppelganger, the two parts of Cooper were reunited as one. I never thought of it as Mr. C going back to the lodge, while Good Coop marched along to the main quest all righteous and untainted. I could be wrong, of course, but I personally view this moment as the two sides of Cooper being reunited.
I am happy every hour of the day. My life is full, because I know that I am loved.
John Merrick received hope from his friends. Treves and Gom and Mothershead especially. They all provided Merrick with friendship and care. Even some of the nurses who were initially afraid of Merrick came around. This built a foundation that allowed Merrick to finally flourish. But it was Mrs. Kendall who helped provide Merrick with a greater sense of hope and purpose and fulfillment. Merrick broke down in tears the first time a woman treated him with respect and wasn't horrified at the mere sight of him. But Mrs. Kendall, although perhaps also exploitive in her own way, she made John feel special when she spent time with him alone and kissed him. Mrs. Kendall was instrumental in providing him his opportunity to go to the theater, and she was also the catalyst that provided him with the experience of being cheered and receiving a standing ovation. Someone who all of his life had been harassed, abused, tormented, shamed. Someone who was stared at, gawked at as an attraction for amusement. Someone who caused people to jeer, scream, and retreat in horror. Mrs. Kendall provided him with these three magical moments. She also kick-started his acceptance in a way that expanded outside the hospital walls. Laura Palmer was seemingly the one who provided Cooper with a greater sense of hope and purpose, although whether she provided fulfillment remains a matter of debate. After Cooper reunited with his darker side, his immediate next objective was bringing Laura home. It's difficult to say what Cooper was expecting here. But if we are to assume that the good Coop was steering this ship, we can assume that his intentions were probably good. But again, if this was good Coop, why not provide Laura with a real choice about what she was getting into without at least explaining the potential risks? I mean, even in Fire Walk With Me, Cooper didn't want Laura to take the ring, but Laura defied his hopes and made her choice. That decision was Laura's and Laura's alone to make. Whether Cooper was attempting to sacrifice Laura at the end for the greater good, or whether he was using her as some type of weapon to combat Judy, the question remains, why didn't Cooper give her a choice? Doesn't this seem inherently a little underhanded for our beloved Special Agent Dale Cooper? Doesn't this feel more like something Mr. C would do? So having just recently watched The Elephant Man for the first time in years, I can honestly say I love it more with each viewing. It remains for me one of the most emotionally touching and emotionally taxing movies I've ever experienced. I believed that when I was 9, and I believe that now some 35 years later. I'm not ashamed to admit that it brought a few tears to my eyes, and perhaps more so now than with previous viewings, because I fondly recall watching this for the first time many years ago with my father, who has since passed. Which, incidentally, I think is another overlapping theme with Twin Peaks Season 3, that everything is determined by time and circumstances, and that we are all racing towards the same finish line, so we should all make the best of the time we have. But my appreciation for The Elephant Man has grown tremendously, and I adore the exploration of varying degrees of exploitation and how you can sometimes still feel guilty despite doing a basically good deed. It's an absolutely beautiful movie, and if you haven't seen it in a while, keep it in mind. As a final note, if Cooper ever had a moment of inner conflict the way Treves did, I don't think it happened until the moment when he asked what year is it, which further suggests that Cooper knew there could be problems when he was exploiting Laura, because one way or another, he was exploiting her. She had already made her choice. So if Cooper had his moment of inner conflict, was that it? When he was realizing what was happening to Carrie? Was it too late? Or is there more of the story Lynch is looking to share when it comes to Carrie Page? I, for one, am just itching for more. Itching indeed. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed and have a wonderful night.
Am I a good man? Or am I a bad man?
What year is this?